Dr. Max, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate this. This is interesting because I've been, I've followed your work in the past, and when I got notification that you had a new book that was coming out, SuperAdaptability, I really wanted to have this conversation. So, thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today. I really appreciate it.
Looking forward to it.
So, before we hit record, I was going through here are all the things that I really appreciated about your book, and there was a point in the book, and to be clear, it's SuperAdaptability: How to Transcend in an Age of Overwhelm, which to me is how long is this age going to last? Is the first thing.
Well, I'm aware that I interrupt and self-interrupt, but kind of my point was that humans have existed in a perpetual age of overwhelm. That's our history and prehistory. We're overwhelmed because there's way too much to understand. Big brains, big problems, big solutions. That's where existentialism and Zen and everything else come from, is us just being hit over the heads by the realization that we're alive and that we're going to die and that we have choices. So I would say that the age of hominids is the age of overwhelm and always will be. It's our nature.
And yeah, I agree. And, it's funny because generationally, I was just thinking about this with my kids who are, my daughter is going to be 21 in a couple of weeks from where we're recording this. My son is 15 going on 16. And you can even see that with their lives, that they're sensing that, to a great degree, not just in terms of internal overwhelm, but there's a lot of external factors that are really, I think, wreaking havoc with them earlier than I might have thought would be happening. And again, a question my daughter and I, we were just chatting about this the other day, this idea of, she's got stuff to do. She goes, and again, somebody who works in productivity and time management and all that stuff. She said, Dad, you'd be proud I checked off all my lists. She goes, but for every one thing I check off, I have to add 3 more. And the big question I had for her was do you have to? And that's, I think, part of the problem is that there's this sense that doing productive, and I've said this before, is the same as being productive. By doing this productive, for lack of a better term, I'll use loop, which we're going to get to. We kind of missed the plot, right? And I think part of the overwhelm keeps us there. What do you think about that? Keeps us in that mindset as opposed to breaking apart, going, hold on, let's step back and assess and see, is this stuff that I'm trying to check off or even adding to the list in the first place, is there a point to it?
It reminds me of that scene in Fantasia where the Mickey Mouse character, the Sorcerer's Apprentice, he starts with his magic and then it gets bigger and bigger and more problematic. Or Zeus, the Cat in the Hat, he's trying to get rid of the stains, and every time he gets rid of one and moves it somewhere, it gets bigger and it's more problematic. I think the acceptance that life is bigger than we are, that choices are infinite, and that we may have to actually deal with many of those. It's where I differ from some people, that you can't just choose one thing. You've got to balance like a billion. If you've been alive for 5 minutes, you should realize that. It would be fake to not. But still, we have choices. You can't do it all. You can't face it all. So when are you going to choose? Where are you going to choose to put energy and to stop? I've described recently the idea that we have Pez heads. You remember those Pez dispensers? I assume you do.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought Pez, pragmatism, existentialism, and Zen, that a good human head would be kind of a Pez head, because you'd look at what worked and you'd look at why you're doing stuff. And you'd also say, I can't do it all. I must just pause. I must realize that I'm not that important, so I'm allowed to stop. So yeah, I think it can't go on forever. You can't do zero inbox as the whole purpose of your life. That would be to confuse what you were talking about as productivity and productiveness. Yes.
Yes.
So what kind of nuss are you? I remember that movie about nuss. that you
Yes.
had Max-ness and Mike-ness.
Yep.
What is humanness?
Yep.
What is a good life? What
Yep.
does it look like for me? It can't possibly be identical to the next person's.
Well, nowness, right? Like there you go. Like the ness, like there's a presence there. I think, and you as you go through the book, there's like presence plays a role in it. What I love what you've done. Number one, the design of the book is fascinating in a number of ways. Number one, you've obviously thrown illustrations in there to kind of, I just love it when a book, there's careful craft involved in so much of the book. Secondly, just the breaking up of the text to drive what I found, and I'd love to hear how conscious and intentional it is, and based on, I probably know the answer to this, but I'd rather hear it from you, is it was compelling to keep reading, because you, like, often when things are broken down the way that this book breaks it down in terms of design and the way it looks, is there's a highlighting of different points. So if you see a line standing out on its own, opposed to paragraphs, like, oh, this is a key point, this is a key point. And as I'm reading, I'm like, these are all key points. And I think that's the point of it, is like, I'm seeing these things, and there's like this, for lack of term, repetition, again, back to the loop thing, that is not redundant, but necessary. I'm wondering, like, the design choices in the book in terms of both text and graphical stuff, how much of a hand was, how important was it to you that it was done in that fashion?
It simply had to be. It was necessary. I mean, this book very much, you've read some of my previous work, it emerged as I think it had to be. I did not intend writing this book, for starters. I'd intended updating a previous book that I had. A publisher came to me and said, hey, can you get the rights back and do a second edition of Adaptability, a previous book, much simpler book. And I started to do that. I thought, hey, I'll just knock it out quickly to carry on doing what I was doing. But I got hold of this question, how do humans, what does human history teach us about our ability to transcend current limitations? What is that? And as I started to do that, I ran 200K-ish every week. I didn't realize that until I started getting my notifications. And I was running and I was dictating. And everything I did, you probably feel the rhythm.
Yeah.
That I said, and then I'd go, but hold on, I've got to go back, because if I don't say this, or if I don't make it clear to the reader that I can hear them, I can feel what you're thinking, then it's incomplete. And so it carried on looping, as you know from the book, not repetitiously, but recursively, to take somebody to just far enough every time I talk to them, every line, hopefully, but certainly every paragraph, take them to a new place where they go, that paid off, didn't it? Like a comedian does.
Yeah.
That joke on page 1, that was a setup for something you only get to in this stage, but all of it's worth reading. And that's what it was like discovering it as a creator, as I dictated, as I wrote. I kept going back, and I must have rewritten it about 10 times, in the sense of going back and saying it's missing a whole section. If it doesn't have this, it doesn't pay off. So yes, the art, which was mine, the lack of a table of contents or an index, the fact that you can read it from the back as well as the front, that I'm talking to you, all very deliberate, recursive choices to immerse you in it, which I think actually works.
It worked. It worked. What was also interesting is, as I was reading, I'm like, and I wonder, because of the recursive nature of it, I'm thinking, is Max trying to also remind himself of this in the process of writing it at the same time that he's also demonstrating it to us or illustrating it for us? So, I mean, I know as a writer, when I've said things, or I'm writing, well, there's that common phrase, write the book that you want to read, right? That's cliche, but what cliches are, right? And I felt that as I'm reading it, going, he's also making sure, like, he's galvanizing his own arguments and his own ideas through this, the way that he's writing this. Does that sound like what happened for you?
It does. I had this question. I mean, I was having a very, the world has, as you mentioned earlier, there's some doom stuff happening now.
Hmm.
Maybe that's new. Maybe that's always happened to somebody who's listening or watching this, or maybe it's new to them. Some people clearly in place in the world have been experiencing that all of our lives.
Right.
But we're starting to feel more of it. It's coming through the technology, the wars, the climate stuff, the political situation, the lack of agreement. I mean, it's a lot.
Hmm.
And so there was all of that, as well as somebody important in my life was very ill. All of that turbulence. Where I'm saying, but if this has always been the case, the age of overwhelm, it's always been like this for humans. And other people have done this. Maybe they've been there before me, or they've done it better. What have they got to teach me? And can I share with somebody else? And can I show somebody else this journey I've been on in a way that isn't just, I read this book and that I'd like to share with you this quote. I wanted it to feel like you were running with me.
It's visceral.
Murakami.
Yeah.
You were running with me, and it was beating and it was beating, and you're going, I am in your head, Max. I am, but what's the movie? Being John Malkovich.
Yes.
I'm inside your head. I'm looking out like Kaufman, and I'm seeing things through your eyes and through these other people's eyes that you are borrowing in turn in order to learn from Kasuna or William James or whoever it is. I see what you're seeing inside their head. Wow, if I was able to swear, I would. That is bleeping amazing, because that's a human thing.
It was
inside my head, inside Kasuna's head, experiencing what she's experiencing. I mean, what a blast. That was what it was like and what I wanted to share. I was talking to you just like everybody else, whoever picks this thing up.
It was visceral. It was a very visceral read. And I think that it's interesting because one of the first things I bookmarked was recur ergo vivo. I loop, therefore I live. And I'll showcase it right here because it's pretty, for me, the first thing I thought about was not only, and we're going to get into the loops that you've shared, obviously, but I could feel, and you mentioned Murakami, and I've recently reread what I talk about when I talk about running, right? And what I loved about it was this exploration that I could feel was going on in that book was very similar to what I felt in this one. It's like, how do I tell the story of me being a writer through running? But this is different because how do I showcase, like, how do I solve this problem, or at least draw your attention to this problem? I think that there's that too, because when I'm going through the book, like, you've got these rules, right? And the table of contents like you said, it's not really a table of contents illustrating the rules in these loops. I found that these patterns, we tend to, I feel, at least when I'm talking to him, whether it's a client or my audience or whatever, is that we don't stop to see pattern recognition nearly as much as we should. And the loops, to me, not only were they loops within loops within loops within loops, but they offer some guidance as to how to do that. Is how to, hey, you see a pattern? Here's a pattern that helps you see the pattern if you don't see it. How did you not get turned around during this whole process? Because, if you're in your own head and it's like, we see this happening with writers a lot. Like, I didn't feel, as I was going through the book, going through all of these rules and seeing the callbacks that you mentioned, I'm like, how did he not get lost in this? Like, what kept you?
I went down there. There were a couple of times.
Sure.
When there's a couple of answers to it. There are a couple of times when I went down rabbit holes about, say, loopology or something, which is not a word that's in the book. But, once you start to see the world as loops, where does that take you? What's the physics of it? What's the psychology and the philosophy of it? And I went down those things and I prepared stuff and I threw out as much as I kept, because I just go, no, that doesn't feel right. That's being dunked. And then I would also keep these meticulous notes stuck up in the room that I was running in, because I did a lot of running inside, round and round and round this big room. And I'd stick up these things for every rule. And I'd say, but okay, so that's what I've tackled, that's what I haven't tackled. And every chapter, as you know, has the same structure. But it's not as formulaic as it sounds. It's more like DNA or something. I
Yeah.
think it comes out as in the end you go, but it's got to be that way, hasn't it? If in order to exhibit the function, so recognize is split into three functions, as you know, detect, interpret, decide. And then understand is split into three functions. Model, we'll get back to it, but model, modify, mechanism. And then necessary action is split into three functions: enact, energize, and embed. And then it gets into a 10th chapter where it says, but you've got to loop this thing again. Each of those clearly needs to be demonstrated logically. It needs to be demonstrated from personal experience and patterns and real world experience that you can see through, and the science of it. And it needs to beat so that you go, okay, yeah, I get the point. Is he going to tell me in the next few lines what I need to know at this point? And will it pay off later? And that's how I wrote it. I mean, I just kept going back, and it got longer and longer, but not, I think, overall, because it's the thing it had to be. It's an object of my mind, an objet d'esprit. To me, however pretentious that may sound to anybody, it's what it is what it purports to be. And I think if you read it, you can see through my eyes and learn what I learned. I think that's possible. Certainly, that's why I've thrown it into the world to see.
Well, and you know, when we talk about the run, you know, recognize, understand, necessary action. My first thought when I was getting to that point was not the fact that you were running, right, obviously, but the idea that overwhelm, we often run from it. We try to run from it. You can't. Like, you can't run from it because, you know, it part of the reason you would even think about that is because it's there. So therefore, by virtue of that, it's basically with you. Every it's the water bottle.
No, that is true. You can't. It's like existential dread.
Yes,
you can't outrun death, no matter how many times, you know, a billionaire does a forever thing. And even if they did do it, we know, as sci-fi buffs know, that even eternal life doesn't actually get rid of the problem. You exist. What now?
Yeah.
So we can't do that. It's something else we have to do, which is why I keep asking the question in the book. What does a super adaptive mind do at this point? Mm-hmm. This bit of adapting deliberately, I'm talking about, this isn't evolution through genetics. The deliberate adaptation bit, the conscious one, how do humans do that? Logically, psychologically, and also the patterns that have from other people's lives that demonstrate that. And that's the cool thing, because I think this is the best we can do.
Yeah.
What's in the book is the best humans can do.
Well, and what you've done is, see, when you're talking about, like, you know, logically, emotionally, personally, you really, what I found as I was going through again, as I went through the book, everything seemed reasoned. Do you know what I mean? And I think that you know, I've recently been listening to the idea of Thomas Paine's, Common Sense, which, you know, for those in the United States, it's the 250th anniversary of that as well, not just of the country. But it was called Plain Truths before it was called, or Plain Truth before it was called Common Sense. And as you read some of that stuff, most of it, and he even talks about the Age of Reason, and that's more in a, I guess, more of a biblical or spiritual or religious text or sense. But as I'm going through this, I'm like, there is reasoning going on here that, number one, kind of allows people to understand, because I think a lot of people, when they approach problems such as this, especially overwhelm, and when they're going through these basically step-by-step or loops, because some people will look at that from a step-by-step perspective. You can't go through them completely logically, because that's not a human experience. You can't be completely emotional about it, because you'll wonder where the hell how you got to where you are, and that overwhelm can be even more problematic. So reason is kind of like the dancing between the two, like, you know, it's a balance. And again, it's not a 50-50 thing. It's situational and circumstantial. But I think that, to me, not only makes this you offer how-tos, but they're nuanced, and you offer why-tos, which are nuanced. So it actually, anyone who reads this book and they're going through it, you've given them these loops that they're already they're going through inadvertently. but not necessarily intentionally, and you're bridging that gap.
I love that you notice that sense that this is, I write at some point, you already loop, you're already looping. I didn't invent that, nor did I invent the idea that this is this cognitive behavioral loop that allows us to recur, allows us to end up not just repeating behaviors, but choosing to end up somewhere better. I didn't invent any of this. I'm just describing what people, humans do, hominids do, and what others before me, long before me, and greater minds for all I know, William James, Ada Lovelace, just so many different people, what they have either demonstrated through their lives and choices or written about, the great flywheel of society. James, Bordeaux and his meta habits, the idea that our whole societies are made up of many, many habits, not all of which we are aware of, even as we're doing them. I'm offering, I guess, a conscious description for a person who wants to pause and say, as you know, rule 0 was added almost at the last period of the book, because I said to myself, okay, I'm offering you 10 chapters here. It's a lot of material. What if you just want to overcome overwhelm and you don't want a big book to write it? And I gave you a mini book at rule 0. Just read that. It'll be okay. I'll get you past overwhelm and get you aiming higher than just getting over your anxiety.
Right.
But the whole thing still fits together and allows you to go as deep as you're willing to keep reading. Yeah. And as often, I would suggest, because these are ideas that have been with me a lot longer than the writing process of this book, since I first came across these people, which is a long time ago for most of them.
It reminded me, the beginning of the book, of How to Live on 24 Hours a Day by Arnold Bennett, because it's short. It's shorter than that book, because, anyone who's read that book knows it's basically articles that were published in the London Free Press and combined into a book. Again, a pamphlet, not unlike Common Sense. But what it does is, it'd be if Bennett was asked, go deeper with this, go deeper with this, go deeper with this. So yes, you can get the crux of it from that very opening. But what I loved about it too is that you can start where you're at. Like you brought up the point, you could start later. You can pick up the book and you can go from back to front, whatever, which I love. And you actually mentioned at one point in the book the idea of systems, right? So I'm going to quote something that you've got in the book, because we hear about time management, and we'll bring it back to this, like the idea of managing time, and which is arrogant, and we can't manage time because time is bigger than us, but we can manage our calendars, right? So those are the things that allow us to relate and create this conduit. But you talked about making space when it comes to systems, right? So the idea of all systems need slack: muscles, lungs, minds, marriages. Without a space to shift into, there's no adaptation. Without room to reframe, you only repeat. The empty square isn't wasted. It's what makes the whole thing work. And we get so focused on dialing in our systems with apps and to the point where, or we hyper schedule, right? To the point where we're processing a life instead of living one. And that, I think, in and of itself creates more problems than I would rather have you have no system than a system that is so tightly wound. And so I love the idea of space. And I think that, again, the way the book is put together, it offers plenty of it. So can you talk a little about the idea of space in the construct of the book of and the idea of SuperAdaptability as a whole?
I think so. Several, as you know,
I brought up a lot there. Yes,
but I'll pick some of it.
Sure.
First of all, the section that you. It's weird because I dictated so much of it and would come back to it. I've got a very good memory of what I wrote, which is unusual. So the section that you're talking about, I think I start with a sliding puzzle. Those little square kids puzzles that have 9 blocks.
Yeah.
Well, they don't. They have 9 space. They have 9 spaces, as it were, and 8 of them are filled.
That's correct. Yeah.
And they come jumbled. And you can only get them back to the proper picture, the holistic picture, if the action gestalt, in my terms, if you have this spare space. In fact, usually they come with a block in that ninth space, and you have to take it out in order to move these pieces around. So somebody can look it up if they don't know what I'm talking about. But I use that sometimes with clients. I do a huge version that actually does move things around, because I show them that it's impossible, if you don't make space, to rearrange anything. And of course, most of the cosmos is space or dark matter, depending on your viewpoint.
Yeah.
And I think not only do you have to create the space, you have to create what I describe as a third space at some point. That's another thing in addition. And the third space is the idea that things are too often split between binaries, unattractive binaries, and people don't consider that there is an alternative to these two binaries. Find that one, and you may find a possibility of something. And from that third space, it leads into another space, into another space. And I return to that motif in different ways several times. Find the space. When you get to a cul-de-sac, I don't know if you have cul-de-sacs
We do.
in Canada, but a dead end.
Yep.
When you get to a dead end, it's not really a dead end, is it? There is no such thing as a dead end. Really, in time and space. So when you think you're in it, it's the lack of imagination, in a sense, of pausing and saying, I can't keep hitting this thing. There must be a way out. I must either turn around and exit, or find what are clearly ways out, turning the trap into a trap door, as I say in the book. How do you transform an apparently hopeless situation into one with hope, which we know humans have done. The book's full of them, where humans have done it, and they will continue to do it, because we kind of seek the best of us. I don't mean the best of us as people. I mean the best of what any of us are capable of, is finding a way out. And we go, hell, wow. There actually was a way. I did not have to have a disaster. There was something I could do. So space, meaning all of those things. You could be wrong, you could be right. A certain kind of humility, adaptive humility, that often rescues us because things aren't fixed. It's a dangerous illusion.
So, and nuance plays a huge role as I was going through this book as well. Like, I'll give you another example of something that caught me when you were talking about the truth in the clouds, right? The idea of cloud cards and all that stuff. So I'm reading this, and and this is I think the other interesting thing when you're reading something that carries you to different places. And that's what I believe this is what this book does. Even with the illustrations, the arrows, the loops, like there's a dynamic element to it, which I really appreciated. But all I thought about, and we talked about music before we hit record, was Joni Mitchell's Both Sides Now, right? The song. And if you listen to the lyrics of that song, a lot of people will listen. It's a beautiful song, but just read the song. It's the passage of time and perspective, which is space, to recognize that, she's seen a lot of things from both sides now. And, the clouds come up into that. And as I was sitting there reading this, I'm like, this is the nuance plays such a huge role in the human experience. And space is obviously a part of that. Time is all of this. When you were writing this, and when you were putting it together in a structure, what role was nuance in the final kind of, this is what I'm putting out into the world? Nuance would have had to play a role in that. I'm just wondering to what degree.
Well, I'm naturally an it depends person. I'm not a this is.
Right.
So for instance, the interpret section, I'm talking about you could be wrong. I'm talking about John Stuart Mill, the idea of the epistemic humility, that you could be right and you could be wrong, or maybe it's you're a bit of both, or maybe there's an altogether different answer that's neither right nor wrong. It's just better. So that's my nature anyway, which means I'm aware as I'm writing that there's another side of all of these things, and there's layers. So not only, as you said, to live is to loop, and to loop is to live. Not only is that true, but it's also loops all the way down and loops all the way up.
And within.
Levels within, and without, and seeing it from your perspective and my perspective. And so if I'm writing at the end of every chapter, I mean, I know this is a thing that has to be discovered. It is a weird old thing. I've got it.
And by the way,
you've got it, and you know what I'm talking about. But
yeah. So
people who are listening, they're going,
"What is this
really
book?" Like that's so. Again, it's an experiential read, and I think it's very hard, like challenging to. It's kind of like you don't want to give, and I never want to do this when I have a conversation anyway, to give too much away. But because it's I felt it to be such an experiential read, I can't give anything away. Like I can't.
You can't give it all. No, you can't. I think that's so challenging. And it's kind of like I said, I didn't intend reading the book, but it emerged. And it is a very intentional book. But also I feel a bit like I threw it out. I say at the back, I don't know what you're going to make of this book. I don't know what will happen. I think that you've already been changed if you've even read this page. That's what I feel. But I don't really know what's going to happen because there is no beginning, there is no end. And as you know, but from having read it, that the whole book is structured and flows like the idea that it's exhibiting. It is an object d'esprit again. And that means that, yes, it's difficult to share, but I think people are going to find it. I've been almost astonished that people are starting to find it, and those who get through it recognize themselves in it and then keep reading. People genuinely, I mean, I'm not really a markety guy. People genuinely writing to me and saying, I just was stuck. My partner, I discovered that we were bankrupt, that there was a drug thing going on. I had to put it all together, and I was sent this book by a friend, and I realized the impossible was possible because I read this section and I grabbed hold of it. That's not really me. No. It's the sharing of something that humans can do, which changed me too. Mike, and that's quite a strange and profound feeling. That's why I termed the year of writing it my annus profundis. I don't even know what to make of it, but I think it's got something. So I'm glad to share it with you.
You know, when I was writing my latest book, it emerged from an essay called The Path to Productiveness. And looking back now that the book is done, I mean, we're in the final stretch. I think that writing of that, which I did not know, and I think this is the other thing too, as someone, I mean, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. When I was writing that essay, I did not know how much it would become part of what I share now. When you spend a lot of time in an area or an arena, you change. Your views change. There's a maturation. Sometimes there's an attrition. Like there's so many things that can happen. And I look back writing that essay, I finished it on a 3-hour train ride from Lisbon to Porto. And when I finished it, looking back, I kind of knew, I'm like, oh, this is fertile ground that I'm going to return to. I wonder, because obviously you said this wasn't a linear process, right? At what point when you were putting this together, when you were, and again, you mentioned these rules. I imagine they didn't come sequentially. Like there's no way they would have come in order sequentially, or maybe they did, but I don't think they would have. So when you're putting it together, like did that, like, was there an impetus that's like, oh, this is fertile ground that's going to take me so far down a rabbit hole or a path?
The question dragged me through it.
Yeah.
The question
question.
Was, how does one person exhibit this level of SuperAdaptability? How do they transcend their self or their system or their situation? How does that happen logically? Which is how I ended up with the functions. So, there are 9 key chapters,
Yep.
3 steps. You know this stuff and people can read, but, recognize, understand, necessary action. But how was that broken down? And it really just, it was the engine that kept me going, because it was clear I did just an immense amount of work to find just the right example and then dig into their lives sufficiently to be able to show you how they did that in their real life, how Biles, the gymnast, how she mastered the Biles weight and how that applies, and how she clearly demonstrates the superadaptive approach in her whole life, and what we can learn from it, because we can kind of, do you remember the Quantum Leap?
Yep.
TV series that
Yep.
you can kind of jump into, again, their heads and learn from them. So I think from that question came use the run loop and break it into the key functions. From that, how did you demonstrate how a super adaptive person would do it? Because we all recognize things.
Right.
But what is it about a super adaptive person, or when we're in a super adaptive mode, that lets us recognize things differently? That's the point, because you can't recognize it all.
No.
You've got to figure out the bit that's helpful. We all interpret things. What is it about us when we're being super adaptive, we're transcending, that allows us to interpret in a way that's helpful to us? I mean, a really basic idea. You get fired. This is really, really basic.
Okay.
But you get fired. How do you interpret what just happened to you? What is the truth of the situation? Well, I believe that the super adaptive person, or when we're in a super adaptive mode, we interpret it in whatever way is helpful to us to get out of the situation that we're in, if we consider it bad, to end up in a better position to recur. It's not whether it was fair or it was unfair, that it's whichever bit works. You know, the person that's motivated by being hated, the person who's motivated by being loved. What's the reality of it? I don't know. But if they're being hated, probably best to be motivated by being hated, as long as it takes you to get to a position where you're loved. You know what? They seem to move it around to use whatever interpretation is helpful to them to get to a new place, and then they start again. And that's been very helpful. Don't worry about so much truth or not truth. Worry about what helps you get to that next stage. And the same is true for really all these steps. But what works? What's pragmatic, and what works for me? Existentialism.
Right. And again, the run, recognize, understand, necessary action. Those are deliberate. Like recognize versus realize, different. Yeah. Understand versus acknowledge, different. Right. And I think,
it's not this action, as you said. It's not this action,
yep.
Past completion. Necessary action. Necessary action for what? Well, you know this, but necessary action for what? To enact the thing that we have understood and the thing we have recognized needs to be put in place in order for us to recur, get to a better place, which could be you're stuck in the jungle, or somebody's attacked you, or it's an emergency, or it's a teeny little thing, or you can't talk to your child, or any situation. We're moving along, we recognize something, we then turn back into ourselves, we do the understanding, kind of it comes back down here, and then we are free to take necessary action that is capable of actually taking us somewhere better. And if it's not, of course, we jump back into recognize, understand, necessary action. It's not just one thing forever, because why would you want to do the same habit forever? You read a book about habits, it's all about reinforcement. You choose a thing you want to reinforce, what, forever?
Yeah.
Forever you want to do the same thing?
No.
Really?
Novelty is a huge element. Yeah. We need novelty. Like humans love, it's so funny. We've heard this before. Humans love certainty and uncertainty. We love novelty and we love nostalgia. Like all these things are, and I think what can happen, and why I think that people should pick up this book. Don't be scared by the page count, number one, because it's not, like you pointed out, it's not meant to be like you're going to sit here from, you might, but I didn't sit there and read it from cover to cover in one sitting. You can't, like, it's one that again, it's experiential. But to me, there is this dichotomy of we recognizing that we're in loops anyway, like everything is looping and there's loops within it, like we talked about, but yet, so those are patterns, and we need to break patterns and we need to establish them, and we do it anyway automatically. This is, again, there's an intentionality behind it, and I wouldn't expect somebody, nor I would imagine you, to go, I'm going to do them all at once, because
that's that very. It's a madness. That would be madness. You would
Yes.
go mad. Not only would you go mad, you couldn't do it.
No.
That's not what, and that's what I love about this fractal. Like, I mean, I love that you get it so sort of profoundly, like that it's fractal like. You can do recognize, understand, necessary action like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've got a hand thing for it, and there's a reminder in every book, every chapter, which is took huge amounts of work to do, but it's like recognize what's going on that's helpful for me, understand it, and then take necessary action. You know, the click, you can do it that simply to remind yourself, a kind of embodied cognition, to go something, I don't know what's going on here. Is it an opportunity? Is it a threat? I don't know, but I need to just think. I need to, you know, even silently. So I do it to myself and it works. So you can get the whole book, if you like, from just that. Or you can read the first chapter, or you can do a lifelong sort of upgrading of yourself. All of those things are possible. And I think that's why the last chapter is upgrade your upgrade. You can keep doing this and keep sharing it. It's really what you've been blessed with. That all humans, that wasn't really a religious point, but blessed with as in it's been bestowed upon you. That is your genetic gift. You can consider things and deliberately change your meta habit, your action gestalt, all those things. But you can start really simply. It's not an overwhelming book, which is kind of weird to say given how many it clocks in at.
Well, and the fact that there's a depth there, and it's not. And here's the thing, and this is my interpretation. It's the depth is within the pages, but more so within your response to said pages, right? That's where the depth is, which you can, again, this is where, here's another loop. You can either choose to look at it or choose to ignore it, right? Problem is, if you ignore it, it's still there.
Yes, you are dealing with it, even if you're not dealing with it. I mean, I can't, there's nothing you can do. You can ignore the book or you never learn about it. But let's say you actually see it and you go, well, actually, I'm not going to do anything about it. Yeah, you are, because you're looping regardless. You're living in other people's habits regardless. You know, the world, Bordeaux, the world is a giant set of loops, and you're living in somebody else's. And even if it's a bit trite, I don't know how it came off, but you either are running your own loop or you're living in a loop that other people run. It can't be. It is both, but you cannot avoid the impact of recursion. And I think it's pretty profound, I found, even looking at the different ways in which you can loop. You can try to tidy everything up and be ultra efficient. You can lead a messy loop life where nothing kind of makes sense. You can reinforce your loop round and round and round. All these are optional and all of them can work for people. But I think in the end, you will realize if you read it, that the recursive loop is the conscious one that allows you to get somewhere, you know, really better. It's us at our best, I believe.
Max, has been great conversation. We could keep going, but we want people to pick up the book. And frankly, if we keep going, it's a loop. So the book is called SuperAdaptability: How to Transcend in an Age of Overwhelm. Where can people pick up the book, and where can people keep up with the work that you're doing?
All good bookshops. So it's obviously all the North American bookshops, but all the bookshops around the world get clearly. I won't list them, but it is in all of them. So you can do that, clearly electronic and paper versions. But I would urge people to buy both if you want to. But this thing is an object that I think is a choice. And it says on the back that if you're holding this book, there's a good chance the old ways aren't working. I believe that simply by having a copy, you are saying to yourself, I will choose my life. I will consciously choose to understand it better and to live it better, to live, learn, and kind of lead this loop, this approach, build your own cathedrals, find your own cruxes. Best way, there is a landing page for SuperAdaptability, but you can come find me on LinkedIn, but mainly to dive into it. And then later, we're giving people about 6 months to have read it. And then I'm going to go on tour and I'm going to come over to Canada too, but do real sessions where you can dive in with people who've also had time to absorb some of it and kind of go on a journey together, which I think is going to be fascinating. Live art and live exploration of these ideas. That's what we're going to do next.
This is great. I'm so glad that we had the chance to finally connect. Thank you so much for having a productive conversation with me today.
I loved having a productive conversation, or a productiveness conversation. Loved talking and thinking with you. Yeah, been a pleasure. Thanks, Mike.